Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When a quiet lakeside retreat turns into a battleground over property rights, one man stands alone, armed with deeds, law, and relentless resolve. What began as a summer of solitude spirals into a war with a ruthless HOA, but they picked the wrong lake and the wrong owner. When I first turned onto the gravel road leading down to my grandfather's old cabin, the tires crunched over stones that hadn't been disturbed in years. The place had been sitting quiet since he passed, overgrown with pine needles and thyme, but somehow still waiting, like a loyal dog who never stopped expecting you home. I parked beside the sagging porch, took a deep breath, and stepped out into the crisp smell of lake air and cedar. The cabin looked tired, but sturdy, with the same cracked green paint and rusted roof trim I remembered from when I was a boy. This wasn't just a patch of land. It was a piece of my bloodline, passed down from a man who didn't trust banks, but trusted surveyed boundaries like gospel. Most people inherit jewelry or money. I inherited 8.6 acres of forested shoreline, an aging dock, and something even rarer, the deed to the lake bed beneath it. Not lake access, the whole damn lake bed, dock included. My grandfather had worked as a land surveyor in the 60s and, through a series of opportunistic land auctions and bureaucratic blind spots, he'd quietly acquired what most people assumed could never be owned. That kind of title? It's like holding the deed to gravity. I'd only recently decided to reclaim it all, the land, the cabin, and the peace. My work as a cadastral consultant kept me busy in the city, but I needed a retreat, somewhere to sketch, write, and weld in silence. I brought gear, tools, solar panels, and boxes of old records. The structure needed work, but it had good bones. I gave myself the whole summer to bring it back. The first week was bliss. I cleaned, patched, rewired, and even got the rainwater filtration running again. Nights were for bourbon and moths. Mornings were lake mist and dew on my boots. I took a canoe out just for the silence. It was mine. All of it. Then came the people. It started with a silver SUV nosing down my driveway like it owned curiosity rights. Then another, and then a pair of minivans parked at the edge of my gravel lot, doors opening like clamshells, releasing kids, coolers, and foldable chairs. At first, I thought maybe they were lost. Then I watched as they marched straight down my property and made themselves at home on the dock like it was a public pier. A guy even waved at me while dragging a kayak across my lawn. I didn't lose my cool. Not my style. I ordered a batch of clean aluminum signs and bolted them onto oak posts along the shoreline and trail. Private property, no trespassing. Clean font. Red border, friendly, but clear. I even left a number on one in case someone had a genuine question. By week's end, I was seeing 2 to 3 groups a day, sometimes entire families dragging paddleboards and boomboxes. One woman had the audacity to set up a pop-up tent 15 feet from my porch. I didn't yell. I documented. I took photos, noted license plates, and started logging activity. Not because I was angry, not yet, but because I knew that if push came to shove, documentation would beat indignation every time. What I didn't realize, not yet, was that these weren't just random summer drifters. They were locals, organized, entitled, and worst of all, they were part of something much bigger. The first letter came folded too neatly, printed on thick paper that smelled like a dentist's office and bureaucracy. It was taped to my cabin door when I returned from a supply run into town. No envelope, just a red HOA stamp at the top and a signature that looked like it had been practiced in front of a mirror. Karen Davis, President, Golden Pines Homeowners Association. The letter began cordially enough, "Dear Resident," which was already off to a bad start. Then it took a sharp turn into the twilight zone. According to the contents, my cabin was classified as an unauthorized structure erected on community access lakefront. I was informed that I had 30 days to vacate and restore the site to its natural state per Article 12, Section 8 of the Golden Pines HOA Covenant. Now, I'm a professional land surveyor. My idea of a good time is arguing over metes and bounds with a tax assessor. I've drafted easements in my sleep, so it took me all of 10 minutes to realize they weren't mistaken. They were delusional. I penned a brief, formal response. Attached scans of my grandfather's original deed, the title transfer, and property boundary records. Sent it certified mail and copied the county assessor's office just for flavor. I kept it polite. I wasn't trying to start a war, just reminding a group of overly ambitious suburbanites that I wasn't someone they wanted to push. A few days later, I received a second letter, this one shorter and noticeably more aggressive. It accused me of falsifying land documents and obstructing public access to designated community shoreline. It ended with a threat of legal escalation and a request that I remove all signage immediately. I didn't bother replying to that one. Instead, I installed 2 more signs and added a laminated copy of my parcel map under plexiglass next to the dock. The escalation didn't stop there. One morning, I was repairing part of the roof when I noticed movement down the hill. 2 men in polos and khakis, the HOA uniform, I suppose, were walking around my property with tablets, snapping pictures of my house, dock, even my trash bins. One of them crouched and started taking measurements of my porch steps, like he was preparing to list my cabin on Zillow. I walked down, boots crunching on pine needles, and asked if they needed help finding the exit. One of them, a younger guy with a thin beard and sunglasses too big for his face, introduced himself as a compliance liaison. His partner didn't speak, just kept filming. I told them to leave, politely but firmly. When they didn't move, I reached into my tool belt, pulled out a steel tape measure, and asked if they'd like the width of my boot print for their report. That seemed to do the trick. They left, mumbling something about just following protocol. That night, I installed a motion-activated spotlight and trail cameras around the perimeter, not because I was scared, because I was tired of the arrogance. Tired of strangers acting like my land was theirs to audit, and most of all, tired of playing polite. But it wasn't over. Later that week, someone posted in the local Golden Pines community forum a screenshot forwarded to me by a friend from town. It featured a photo of my cabin and the caption, "Old hunting shack illegally built on our public shoreline. We're demanding removal. HOA action pending." They didn't know I'd seen it. They didn't care. It wasn't just ignorance, it was entitlement. Deep, ugly, self-righteous entitlement. The kind that's convinced it can bend reality because it has a committee and a newsletter. But I dealt with worse, and I had something they didn't. Receipts. It took me 3 hours to gather everything. I didn't just want to bring documents, I wanted to bring a hammer made out of paper. I dug through the old fireproof chest my grandfather had left behind, pulled the originals out of their plastic sleeves, and then double-checked them against the county registry. Everything matched, line for line, seal for seal. By the time I was done, I had a folder thick enough to choke a paper shredder. Deed to the land, title to the lakebed, documentation of the dock's installation in 1953, a certified survey from '78, and a transfer of ownership form filed with the state 10 years ago. And the cherry on top, a land use permit that listed the very lot Golden Pines HOA had paved and painted and labeled community parking area as part of my grandfather's parcel. I wasn't angry anymore. I was curious. I wanted to see their faces when I dropped that last piece. The HOA meeting was held in a church gymnasium that had been dressed up like a courtroom cosplay. Rows of metal chairs, a folding table with a plastic tablecloth, and a microphone that kept cutting out every other word. I sat in the back at first, folder on my lap, watching Karen Davis work the room like a senator up for re-election. Blonde bob, tailored blazer, and the kind of smile you'd expect from someone who sold timeshares to retirees. When the meeting officially started, Karen took the mic and wasted no time launching into her spiel. Something about protecting community assets, resolving ongoing encroachments, and removing unlawful structures along the lakefront. Then she gestured toward a printed photo taped to an easel, a picture of my cabin zoomed in from a poor angle, looking like a crime scene. That structure, she said, voice rising, was never approved. It sits on land designated for community enjoyment. We've reached out repeatedly. No cooperation. As your HOA president, I will not let our lake be privatized by squatters with fake paperwork. I stood up. No theatrics. Just a calm walk to the front. Karen's smile froze mid-word. I reached into my folder and pulled out the first page. The deed. Then the title. The survey. One by one, I laid them on the table like I was playing poker with God's own cards. "I'm Elliot Branson," I said, "legal owner of the cabin, the dock, the lakebed, and, as of 1979, the lot your HOA uses for parking. All registered with the county. All current. If you want copies, I've brought them." The room went quiet. One guy in a fishing vest started whispering furiously to the woman next to him. A kid near the back coughed like he wanted to break the tension but regretted it halfway through. Karen didn't flinch. Her mouth twitched, but she kept control. "Those documents," she said slowly, "could be falsified. We'll need time to verify. They're certified, stamped, and notarized. You can check with the county, or your insurance provider for that matter." She took a breath. Regardless, the community has been using that area for years. That kind of use constitutes a de facto claim under common law precedent. "That's adorable," I said. "But no. You're confusing entitlement with ownership. I have the receipts. You have opinions." A few chuckles scattered through the room. Karen didn't like that. Her jaw tightened and she grabbed the microphone with both hands like she might throttle it. "This isn't over," she said. "We'll explore legal remedies. Our attorneys will be in contact." "I look forward to it," I replied, and turned to walk out. As I left, I caught sight of a poster on the community bulletin board. "Annual Lakefront Picnic, donations encouraged," scheduled to be held next week. Right there, on my land. I took a photo. Never know when you'll need an exhibit. 3 days after the HOA meeting, the war came home. Not with subpoenas or certified mail this time, but in the form of flip-flops, folding chairs, and a half-empty box of gas station donuts left on my dock. I'd taken a trip into town that morning to pick up a new water pump and a roll of copper line. When I returned, the scene looked like a family reunion had detonated in my backyard. 3 SUVs were parked at the edge of my gravel lot, one half on the grass with its rear gate wide open. A cooler dripped beer onto the pine needles, and someone had dragged a Bluetooth speaker out onto the dock. Classic rock blaring like this was some low-budget lake festival. I parked without honking, walked down without a word. The people didn't even glance my way, just kept lounging, sunbathing, dipping toes into water I legally owned. A teen in an American flag tank top cannonballed off my dock while his girlfriend recorded it on her phone. "Whose property do you think this is?" I asked calmly. One of the women sitting in a beach chair popped her sunglasses up and blinked at me. "Oh, this is community space. Karen said it's open to everyone." Of course she did. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I simply pulled out my phone, took slow, deliberate photos of every face, every car, every beer can. When one of the guys asked what I was doing, I smiled. "Just collecting evidence," I said. "Trespassing, littering, and possible underage drinking." Smile. That got them moving. Not all at once, but like a tide pulling back. Within 10 minutes, the cars were gone, leaving only muddy tire tracks and a shredded Slim Jim wrapper behind. That night, I installed 2 more trail cams angled at the dock and the parking area. I reinforced the old chain-link gate at the trailhead and added a heavy-duty padlock. I didn't care if it looked unfriendly. It wasn't meant to be. The next day, the retaliation came. I was sipping coffee on the porch around 9 when I heard tires crunching on the gravel again. A silver Audi pulled up, followed by a navy blue Subaru. Karen stepped out of the first one like a prosecutor entering the courtroom she paid for. 2 men climbed out of the second, tall, matching windbreakers carrying clipboards and some kind of measuring tool. I stood before they could approach the house. Karen strode up with that signature tight-lipped smile and waved a hand toward the dock. "You're going to need to take that down," she said without preamble. "We've reviewed our maps and it's clearly encroaching on community shoreline. The board has authorized removal." I blinked. "Your board doesn't authorize anything on my land. You're not the government, and you don't own this dock." One of the clipboard guys started walking around the side of my cabin, trying to get behind the structure. I cut him off with a single step. "You're done," I said. "This is private property. Get off it." "We're conducting a compliance review," he replied. "You're trespassing." I corrected him. "That's a legal term you should get familiar with." Karen didn't back down. She took a step forward, her heels crunching into gravel like a threat. "We've tolerated your posturing long enough. Your presence is a liability. You're preventing dozens of families from enjoying their right to lake access." "You mean their habit of abusing someone else's property for free," I said. She pulled out a folder and waved it like a magic wand. "We're initiating formal proceedings. You'll be hearing from our attorney." "You already did," I said, pulling my own copy of the parcel map from my tool bag. I unfolded it and pointed to the bold black line that wrapped around the dock, the shoreline, and, most deliciously, the gravel lot their cars had parked on. Karen's face twitched. "You're making a mistake," she hissed. "No," I said. "You are. And you keep making it louder." She stormed back to her car, practically vibrating with fury. The clipboard twins followed, though one of them glanced back at me with a look that said, "This job isn't worth the trouble." They left a fine layer of dust in their wake, but I didn't move. I just stood there, fingers tight on the edge of the old map, wondering how long it would take before they realized I wasn't bluffing. And I never had been. The lawsuit arrived in a thick envelope, hand-delivered by a man who clearly didn't want to be there. He muttered my name, handed it over, and got back into his truck without waiting for a signature. Can't blame him. Inside was a formal complaint from Golden Pines HOA, filed with the county court. They were suing me for unlawful occupation of community-designated lakefront, obstruction of public access, and, my personal favorite, willful degradation of shared recreational resources. I almost choked on my coffee when I read that last. 1. My doc apparently was a national treasure now. I didn't waste time. Called my attorney, Lynn Hayward, a sharp, relentless land use lawyer I'd worked with on previous consulting projects. Lynn was the kind of woman who wore cowboy boots to hearings and smiled like a shark in repose. She asked for scanned copies of everything I had, then drove out to the cabin the next morning with a laptop, a legal pad, and a cup of black coffee that smelled stronger than mine. After an hour of reviewing the suit, she leaned back on my porch railing and said, "This is a joke, but an expensive one. Let's punch back." We drafted a countersuit that same day. Trespassing, unauthorized use of private property, monetizing assets they didn't own, attempted displacement through false claims, and, just for spice, intentional infliction of emotional distress, because if someone tries to evict you from land your grandfather bled for, you're damn well allowed to be distressed. The next move was physical. We blocked off the parking lot. I rented 2 large concrete barriers and had them delivered the next morning. They were dropped across the gravel entrance to the lot with a resounding thud that echoed through the trees like a closing gate. Then I bolted new signs onto the barriers. Private property. No access. Trespassers will be prosecuted. That afternoon, I installed a fresh array of trail cams, including one wired into a solar panel and tied directly to a cloud backup. I wasn't just guarding land now. I was building a wall of receipts for the courtroom. Sure enough, Karen came roaring in the next day like a backup singer for a failed revolution. She pulled up, got out, and immediately started shouting across the lot, "You can't block community access." I didn't budge from where I was trimming a cedar post near the trailhead. Not your community. Not your access. She stormed up to the barrier, took pictures of everything, and then, just as predicted, called the cops. I watched from the porch as a sheriff's cruiser pulled in 10 minutes later, lights off, windows down. Deputy Ramirez, a guy I'd seen before at the hardware store, stepped out and waved at me. Then he talked to Karen for a few minutes while she gestured and pointed like she was reenacting a crime scene. Eventually, he walked over to me, rubbing the back of his neck. "Hey, Elliot," he said. "So, she's claiming you're blocking off a public amenity." I handed him a printed copy of the land records and the certified parcel map, all in a plastic sleeve. He flipped through them, nodded, then walked back to Karen. Their exchange was brief and animated. Lots of hand movements on her end, almost none on his. When she finally drove off, her tires spat gravel like insults. Ramirez came back, shrugged, and said, "Well, she's mad, but you're good. Just maybe get ready. I think she's going to escalate." "I'm counting on it," I said, because every move she made was another nail in her case. Lynn doesn't believe in slow burns. 2 days after filing the countersuit, she showed up at the cabin with a cardboard box full of records and a smirk that usually meant bad news for someone. And in this case, that someone was Karen Davis. "Hope you've got strong coffee," she said, dropping the box onto my kitchen table with a thud. "Because we're going mining." Inside were property tax statements, HOA budget reports, city zoning maps, and a handful of archived newsletters from Golden Pines dating back a decade. Lynn had called in a few favors at the county clerk's office and done some creative digging through public access databases. What she found was both impressive and infuriating. For starters, she pulled up aerial imagery dating back 15 years. At first, the lot at the edge of my property was just a patch of grass and scrub. But by the time you reached 2015, it had been paved, striped, and turned into a functioning community parking area. We could even pinpoint the year a small wooden kiosk had been built near the trailhead, a spot where, it turns out, HOA volunteers had been collecting suggested donations for lake access during the summer. It got better. A budget report from 5 years ago showed an entire line item labeled Lake Maintenance Fund, backed by quarterly dues and access fees, even though the HOA didn't technically own a square inch of shoreline. They'd been charging residents, and in some cases, outsiders, for access to my land, my dock, my lake, my damn gravel. Lynn grinned when she found it. "Oh, this is beautiful," she said. "We're not just looking at trespassing anymore. This is unauthorized commercial use, possibly even tax fraud." We printed it all, highlighted key passages, created a timeline. I added a photo of the donation box at the kiosk, snapped the morning after the HOA meeting, and cross-referenced it with the budget report. A nice, neat paper trail of illegal income sitting under their noses for years. And, the cherry on top, a little fine print on one of the newsletters. Join us for our annual summer splash at the dock. Music, snacks, paddleboard races. Access wristbands available for $5 each. Beneath that was a clip art image of a dock that looked suspiciously like mine. Lynn sat back and whistled. "They turned your land into a carnival and made money off the popcorn." I added a few more screenshots to the case file, then paused. "Think the IRS would care?" Lynn's smile went sharp. "They're going to care a lot." We filed a formal complaint with the IRS the next day. Nothing flashy, just enough documentation to trigger an audit if the wind blew in the right direction. Lynn also sent a courtesy copy to the HOA's attorney. No threats, no posturing, just a friendly update labeled supplemental material, financial activity in question. I don't know how fast it reached Karen, but I know how she reacted. 2 days later, a community update appeared in the HOA Facebook group, forwarded to me by the same friend who'd tipped me off before. It read like damage control written by a drowning PR rep. Karen denied all wrongdoing, blamed a clerical oversight for the lake access issue, and announced that the upcoming summer splash would be postponed due to legal complications. They'd just canceled their biggest event of the year, the one that brought in the most donations. I couldn't help smiling. It wasn't a victory yet, but I could see the panic setting in, especially when the local paper called. Apparently, someone at City Hall had mentioned the lawsuit to a reporter from the county's weekly, and now they were sniffing around for a story. A young guy named Matt showed up with a camera and notebook, full of polite questions and a general look of someone who didn't expect the words dock ownership to involve a legal brawl. I gave him the basic facts, property lines, title history, the absurdity of being sued for existing on my own land. He asked if I had anything to show him. I handed him the thickest file in the folder and said, "Start with the part where they charged for paddleboard races on my dock." His eyebrows went up. "Seriously?" I just nodded. The first real damage came on a Sunday. I'd driven into town to pick up a replacement inverter for the solar array and grabbed lunch while I was at it. 20 minutes tops. When I got back, the chain at the trailhead had been cut clean through, and one of the new no trespassing signs was gone, ripped off the post. The bracket was still dangling like a broken arm. I walked the perimeter slowly. Someone had dumped trash by the dock. Fast food wrappers, a cheap plastic cooler, and a crushed can of bug spray. One of my trail cams had been knocked over and stomped. Another was missing entirely. This wasn't teenagers pulling a prank. This was angry. I logged everything, took detailed photos, including the tire impressions on the dirt. I had a feeling I'd need them. Then I replaced the signs, reset the cameras, and reinforced the new chain with a locking steel bar. The next morning, I ordered a small cellular security system with live alerts. I didn't want to sleep with one eye open just because Karen's little regime had started losing grip. But 2 nights later, things escalated. It was just past midnight. I'd fallen asleep reading case notes when the alert on my phone buzzed. Motion detected at Northern Trail Cam. I blinked myself awake, opened the live feed, and watched as 2 figures moved along the tree line. Hooded, flashlights off, carrying something bulky between them. I was up and moving in seconds. Threw on boots, grabbed the shotgun I kept for bears and fools, and slipped out through the side door, careful not to make a sound. Before I got within shouting distance, a sudden glow lit up behind the cabin. Not firewood glow, fire glow. I sprinted. They'd set one of my storage bins on fire, a plastic container filled with insulation rolls and backup gear. Flames licking 3 feet high, smoke pouring into the air. The figures were already running, one of them stumbling over roots in the dark. I didn't fire. I didn't even shout. I just watched them disappear, then ran for the nearest water drum. Took me 10 minutes to put it out. The bin was melted down to the soil, and a few nearby trees were singed. It could have been a whole lot worse. If the wind had shifted, or if the cabin had been closer, it wouldn't have stopped at gear. Once the flames were dead, I called the sheriff's department. This time, they sent someone out. Deputy Ramirez showed up bleary-eyed but focused. He took my statement, walked the property with a flashlight, and reviewed the footage I'd saved to cloud storage. The resolution wasn't perfect, but we got a partial plate from a parked vehicle just visible through the trees. I could tell Ramirez was pissed. Not loud, not theatrical, just that cold, professional way cops get when someone crosses a line too far. "You want to press charges?" he asked. "Absolutely." "Okay," he nodded. "We'll run the plate. If it's who I think it is, this isn't their first ride." He left after an hour, promising to follow up. I stayed up until dawn, rechecking every lock, every camera feed, every inch of fence line. There's tired, and then there's bone-deep tired, the kind that settles into your chest and whispers that you're not just defending property anymore. You're defending your damn life. The next morning, I called Lynn. She listened without interrupting, then said, "We escalate. Court, media, law enforcement, all of it. We bury them in facts." By noon, she had filed a motion to include the arson attempt as supplemental evidence in the countersuit. She also updated the IRS with a note about potential destruction of documentation. Not that we'd said it was them, of course, but let's just say it's easier to believe in coincidence when no one's burning things. The HOA didn't make a statement. No apology. No email blast to condemn the attack. They stayed silent, which was louder than anything they could have said. But the residents weren't all silent. That evening, I found an envelope tucked into the fence post near the gate. No return address. Inside was a single note. "Not all of us support her. Stay strong." Maybe the cracks were starting to show. They held the first hearing in a boxy courtroom that smelled like coffee burned 3 days ago and stale air conditioning. Rows of tired oak pews, fluorescent lighting that buzzed just loud enough to annoy, and a wall clock that ticked louder than the judge. Perfect setting for justice, or at least the bureaucratic approximation of it. Lynn and I took our seats at the defendant's table. She wore a charcoal blazer with boots that had seen more courtrooms than most lawyers' resumes. I had on a button-down that didn't wrinkle too bad and brought the full binder of evidence, even though she told me I wouldn't need it. "Optics," I'd said. "If they see we're ready to kill with paper, they'll think twice about trying to bluff with air." Karen sat across from us, flanked by her lawyer, a polished man in a slick navy suit with a haircut that cost more than my truck tires. She looked tense. Not scared, not yet, but tight around the eyes. The kind of tight you get when you know the floor is creaking under you, but you're still hoping it won't give. The judge entered, a woman in her 60s with short silver hair and the energy of someone who'd seen one HOA too many in her life. She called the session to order with a bored efficiency I found oddly comforting. Karen's attorney launched right in, claimed that the dock and the cabin rested on land that, while not technically owned by Golden Pines, had been used by residents continuously for over a decade. He said the association had a prescriptive claim based on established community use and that my attempts to block access were hostile and disruptive to neighborhood harmony. Lynn let him talk. Let him spin that cotton candy until the stick got soggy. Then she stood. "Your Honor," she began, "this isn't a question of use. It's a question of title. My client holds full documented ownership of the parcel in question, including the lake bed, the dock, and the parking lot. The plaintiffs have produced no title, no easement, and no legal basis for their claim, just a habit. And habits don't trump deeds." She walked the court through the key exhibits. Certified title, historical surveys, county approvals. She even dropped in a little flourish, a printed photo of a Golden Pines newsletter promoting dockside events with paid entry. The judge raised an eyebrow at that. Karen's lawyer tried to object. The judge waved it off. "You opened the door when you brought up community use," she said. "Now let's see what kind of community we're talking about." By the time the first recess was called, it was clear where things stood. The court hadn't ruled yet, but the judge had denied the HOA's request for a temporary injunction. They wanted the dock unblocked pending resolution. She said no. Karen didn't take it well. In the hallway during recess, she cornered me just outside the vending machines. "You're ruining everything," she hissed. I looked at her, calm as a lake at dawn. "You came for my land, Karen. I'm just showing you where the line is." She stared for a moment like she wanted to say more, maybe scream, maybe beg. Then she turned on her heel and disappeared down the hall, heels tapping like a countdown. The second hearing had a different energy, less smugness, more sweat. Karen showed up flanked by two different board members this time, neither of whom looked thrilled to be there. One avoided eye contact. The other spent more time glancing at his phone than at the bench. The only one still putting on a show was her lawyer, but even his tie wasn't as tight, and the edges of his notes looked chewed up. Lynn, on the other hand, looked like she'd slept on a bed of confidence. She was calm, clipped, and deadly. When the judge asked for opening remarks, Lynn stood and spoke plainly. Your Honor, today we'll be providing evidence that the plaintiffs not only trespassed, but profited from that trespass over a span of years. Then she dropped the bomb. She introduced a report from the IRS, expedited but official, confirming that Golden Pines HOA had failed to declare revenue generated through so-called lake access donations and event entry fees. The numbers weren't astronomical, but they were regular, tracked over several summers, and never accounted for on tax forms. Karen's face tightened with every line read aloud. The judge leaned forward. Ms. Hayward, are you suggesting this was intentional? Lynn didn't miss a beat. I'm suggesting it was systematic. We followed that with video footage from my trail cams, trespassers climbing the dock, HOA signage posted illegally on my fence, and, of course, the Summer Splash flyers featuring a cartoon version of my actual property. Then came the witness. A former HOA treasurer, recently resigned, agreed to testify under subpoena. She sat with her hands clenched and her voice shaking but firm. She admitted that Karen had personally directed the collection of fees and had rejected multiple requests to disclose the lake-related income to the general membership. When asked why she stepped down, the woman replied, "Because I didn't want to be part of a cover-up." That moment sucked the air out of the room. Karen's lawyer tried to push back with community testimony, but the few neighbors they called barely helped. One claimed they always thought the dock was public. Another said they'd heard somewhere that the HOA built the lot. No one had documents. No one could point to a single legitimate title or authorization. It was all assumptions wrapped in hearsay. When it came time for closing arguments, Lynn simply said, "This isn't just about land. It's about someone trying to turn ownership into a popularity contest and hoping no one checked the math." The judge recessed for 45 minutes. I spent them pacing the hallway, running through every possible version of the outcome. Lynn didn't say much. She just sat calmly, watching the door. When the court was back in session, the room felt like it was holding its breath. Then the ruling came down. The court found in our favor on all counts. The judge affirmed my ownership of the cabin, the dock, the lake bed, and the parking lot. She dismissed the HOA's claims with prejudice and sanctioned them for filing a frivolous suit. She ordered them to pay $220,000 in damages, including legal fees, compensatory penalties, and the assessed value of unauthorized commercial use. And then, almost as an afterthought, she added that the case file would be forwarded to the district attorney for review on possible criminal misrepresentation and tax evasion. Karen didn't say a word. She just sat there, stone still, blinking like she was trying to wake up from a nightmare that wouldn't end. It rained the morning the signs came down. A soft, steady drizzle that soaked into the gravel and made everything smell cleaner than it had in weeks. Fitting, I thought, like the land itself was rinsing off the nonsense. The parking lot was empty, silent, and finally mine again, not just legally, but physically. I watched from the porch as the last of the unauthorized HOA signage was pulled up by a city crew per court order. The flimsy community lake access boards, the warped kiosk with donation instructions, even the trash can labeled neighborhood use only, gone. One of the workers gave me a nod as they loaded it all into the truck. I nodded back, coffee in hand, boots on dry boards. Later that day, I took out a new sign of my own, custom-made, iron-forged, mounted on a post I'd sanded myself. Simple lettering, matte black on bronze. Yes, I own the lake, and the dock, and the parking lot. Try me again. I planted it at the head of the trail, just where the old kiosk used to stand. Then I took a long walk down the path, past the now empty shoreline, to the dock, my dock, and sat there for the first time in peace. No voices, no pop-up tents, no plastic kayaks scraping wood, just the sound of water lapping against the posts and the low hum of cicadas tuning up for summer. The best part? No one had the guts to challenge it anymore. Karen had resigned the week before, not just from the HOA board, but from the community entirely. Word had it she sold her house in a hurry. No goodbye emails, no final speech, just a cold listing online and a moving truck in the night. One of the neighbors told me she'd left a bunch of garden furniture out by the curb. Maybe she figured it wasn't worth taking to wherever she was going next. The HOA itself was in a kind of suspended animation. The court-ordered restructuring meant they couldn't hold votes, collect dues, or enforce rules until they complied with new financial oversight and transparency standards. From what I heard, most of the remaining board had already started looking for excuses to bow out. No one wanted to be left holding the bag. Meanwhile, I got a letter, not from the court, from a magazine. Outdoor Law, a publication I'd subscribed to years ago, had picked up the story through the local paper and wanted to run a feature. Something about land rights, modern entitlement, and one man's fight for quiet. I didn't say yes right away. Took a few days to think about it. Then I sent them a single photo. Me standing at the edge of the dock, coffee mug in hand, no one else in sight. The article came out 2 weeks later. Headline read, "When the HOA came for the lake, and the lake fought back." I clipped it and tacked it to the corkboard above my workbench, right next to the old deed with my grandfather's signature, full circle. I still get the occasional car that slows at the top of the hill, drivers craning their necks, wondering if it's true, if someone really owns the lake. They never get out, not anymore. Some days I wave anyway, just in case.